All right, so we're gonna go live here and we are good. So I am Terry Camerzell, and I'm here on behalf of Creation Fellowship Santee. We love to learn about our Creator God and believe that the Bible, when read properly, disproves Darwinian evolution. We've been meeting on this online platform since May of 2020. Since meeting online, we've been blessed with over 100 individual speakers. Our mission statement is 1 Peter 3:15. Always be ready to give an answer for the hope that lies within you. You can find most of our past presentations by visiting tinyurl.com/CFS archives. That's C like creation, F like fellowship, S like Santee, and the word archives. Tonight, we're happy to welcome back with us Dr. Aaron Judkins, the Maverick Archaeologist. In addition to being one of the explorers featured in the 2015 documentary Finding Noah, Aaron also discovered a new dinosaur trail named the Judkins Trail. In his last talk for us, he told us about, actually, he's been with us twice before, and he's told us about the dinosaur excavation and also the mysterious Göbekli tribe. Tepe. I hope I pronounced that correct. But he also told us about how he's mapped out the longest contiguous dinosaur trackway in the Western Hemisphere near Glen Rose, Texas. But tonight, he's with us to answer the question, is there evidence for a 6-day creation? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, so I spoke a couple of times before. Thanks for having me back. And thanks to everyone joining on Zoom today to spend some time with us to go over these things. It's important because we need to have a ready answer, like Peter said, to be salt and light. And, I have really great Christian friends who love the Lord dearly, and I love them. But they don't necessarily hold to a young earth. They believe in the gap theory, and they have, millions of years of time inserted where the Bible doesn't theologically state it. And so we'll get into all this. I'm really excited. I've got a lot of information to share with you, and it's going to be really great. The prior two talks, I did speak about dinosaur trackways and excavations. That's a branch of science called ichnology. And then the last time I spoke was on the new book called Decoding Göbekli Tepe. And that's the first book that gives a biblical perspective on that archaeological site in southeast Turkey. And the response has been tremendous. So if you're familiar with my work and you haven't got that book yet, I would encourage you, if you have an interest in history, to go back and take a look at that book and read it. We spent 5 years researching for that book, and it is there's a lot of references in the appendix of the book that that's actually some of those references are going to be referenced here tonight. But I do lay a foundation for a young earth in that book, Decoding Göbekli Tepe. So with that, and if you've missed that, just go to my website. It's aaronjudkins.com, and then go to the Patreon link there. And at Patreon, we're under Ancient Pathways. And a lot of free content is available for you. I have a wonderful free what I call the documents library. And under the documents tab, you will have a lot of free books on ancient history that you can download for free. So there's just a lot of free content that I've tried to make available for everyone. But having said that, let's get into it, because we got a lot of evidence to cover. Preponderance of evidence for a young earth. There's several theories of life origins. A lot of people really don't know this. We're going to go over them briefly because I think it's important to lay the foundation. The first one, as we all probably know, is atheism. There's no God. Life arose through natural processes without any divine intervention. Evolution then would be the first cause. And then we have an agnostic view. view that the existence of God or the supernatural is unknown or unknowable. We have the gap theory, developed in 1804. This is where a gap is inserted between Genesis verses 1 and verses 2. And Lucifer fell then, and God recreated the earth. And then dinosaurs and long ages of time are inserted between verse 1 and verse 2. Then we have the theistic evolution view, which God used evolutionary processes, interpreting Genesis allegorically, and God uses evolution to create. Then we have the day age theory, developed in 1823, not literal days, but 1,000-year periods of time. This interprets 2 Peter 3:8 as equal to 1 day, as being 1 day is equal to 1,000 years of creation time. And then we have something called the revelation day theory, which is 6 successive days in which God explained the creation event to Moses and what he had done, but not necessarily when. And we have the progressive old earth, developed in 1945, and this is the long ages of time geologically in millions of years. This also coincides with number 3, the gap theory, as well. And then the last one that we're going to be discussing tonight is a young earth. Life was created in 6 literal 24-hour days, as described in Genesis. Among these, this theory aligns most closely with both the biblical record and the scientific evidence. Now, I've been a Christian all my life, but I was raised in primary public school like everyone else probably, and I was never, other than Sunday school at my church, I was never taught anything about creation. And although I believed it by faith that we were created, I could never reconcile what I was being taught in school as from this evolutionary point of view, that we all come from what I call pond scum to Einstein. And I could never understand that. And I just never believed it anyway. It sounded like a fairy tale. I just simply believed what God's word said, that we were created. And if I have enough faith to believe that God rose from the dead, I have enough faith to believe that he created everything just like he said back in Genesis in 6 literal days. The creationist timeline actually goes back to several thousand years. Now we won't get into this, but actually, I'll just refer back to my my book, Decoding Göbekli Tepe, because in the back of that book, I've put a chronology timeline about where do you put Göbekli Tepe biblically, and I use 2 timelines. I use a Masoretic text timeline, and I use a Septuagint timeline. So this upper timeline is based on the Masoretic text timeline, goes to Archbishop Usher's around 4004 BC of creation. And then there's the Septuagint timeline, which is not on here, would push that date back further, but not as far back as 20 to 13 billion years ago from the Big Bang, from the evolutionist timeline. It just doesn't happen. With Earth being around 4.6 billion years old, life appearing about 3 billion years, and then man, and then current Homo sapien around 500,000 years ago. It's we're going to look at some of this tonight because the evidence, the observable evidence, is not lining up with this. We're going to start off with just a little bit of a cute thing. It says Darwin report due. I'll grant that to begin with, evolution was just a theory, but it evolved into a fact a long time ago. So we see that this is actually true. They tell the lie often enough and long enough that they actually believe it. It evolves into a fact. Actually, from a fact to literally written in stone, it's just unchangeable. They will not deviate from it. And we're gonna look at the reasons why. Alan Guth and Steinhardt from Scientific American said the observable universe could have evolved from an infinitesimal region. It's then tempting to go one step further and then speculate that the entire universe evolved from literally nothing. And this is actually back in May of 1984 in Scientific American. So we see that their science actually, which is should also be observable, the observable universe, they take it a step further as well and speculates that the entire universe evolved from nothing. So we have at least a consensus from there, but where did the matter come from? Where did the laws of the universe come from? Where did energy come from? And it doesn't explain any of that. Humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. This is back in the 1933 Humanist Manifesto, tenet number 1. And they recognize it as self-existing, which is pretty amazing because now you have ceased to be in the realm of any kind of scientific endeavor, and now you've simply are in a philosophical their arena and questions about how did everything come to be. So again, when you look at it from their point of view, their perspective requires more faith than a creationist to say that this just all happened by random chance for no hope and no purpose and no reason. Now we're going to look at the top. We're going to look at the top 10 evidences. We're not going to get into all 10 evidences tonight, but I'm going to pick out the, some key ones, and then we're going to look at those. Number 1 is the geological column, rapid deposition, bent rock layers, helium and radioactive rocks, the fossil record. We're going to look at soft tissues and fossils. We're going to look at the cosmological and astronomical evidence. We're not going to look at all these, but we're going to look at some of these short-lived comets, supernova remnants, age of the sun. 5, rapidly decaying magnetic field, which is very interesting. We're going to look at human population growth. Number 7, carbon-14 present in fossils, coals, and diamonds. So any measurable carbon-14 should have been gone in less than 100,000 years. Number 8 is going to be very little salt in the sea. 9 is very little sediment on the seafloor. The average thickness of sediment in the ocean is about 450 meters. In the Pacific Basin, the sediment is about 300 to 600 meters thick. And then in the Atlantic, it's about 1,000 meters. And then number 10 is intact biological material, DNA and ancient bacteria in soft tissues. So again, we're not going to get into all of these, but I am going to look at several of these tonight. And we're going to look at each one of these evidences here, more specifically the geological column. This is evidential observations, things that we observe in the world today. This is not anything based in philosophy, philosophical questions. This is actual evidential observations, empirical evidence. So we're going to look at the geological column because this is one of the hallmarks of the evolutionary model. And they say that they propose that the geological column composes of about 12 strata, each spanning millions of years, the Pleistocene, the Pliocene, the Miocene, etc. And then each one supposedly lasted millions of years, one coming after the other. And then all the fossils within each was laid down during that time. However, only 15% of the Earth's surface displays 2 or more of the strata in the correct sequence. Anywhere in the world you want to go, most of that strata is missing. And the Grand Canyon is a perfect example of that. We're not going to specifically get into it, but I am going to just touch on it briefly tonight. And then iconic sites like the Grand Canyon, actually, I just said, that lacks half of the 12 periods. And shows the Cambrian Mojave and Mississippian red wall formations intermixed despite their supposed 200 million year separation. So this is what we observe today. This is observable observations in science, empirical science. So we see that the evolutionary model proposes one thing, but in reality, we see something different. We also see absence of vertical erosion cuts, which means there's no erosion between the rock layers, again, in the Grand Canyon. And then something interesting called the Heart Mountain. I was there years ago, and it's a rock at the summit of Heart Mountain is geologically dated to an evolutionary time frame of 250 million years older than it is at its base. Now that's the rock at the summit is dated older than the rock at the bottom. That suggests that the top and the bottom layers have not always been together. The presumed migration to its present home has puzzled scientists for years. They have known about the mountain and they suggest that it has moved, but no one has been able to explain how it happened or how long it took. Now, this is in Wyoming, just located east of Yellowstone. And scientists have now said that that mountain moved in approximately 30 minutes, as recorded and reported by lifescience.com. And you can go look this up. It's called Land Speed Record. Mountain moves 62 miles in 30 minutes. The evidence indicates that this mountain of rock covering at least 425 square miles rapidly broke into 50 pieces and slid apart over an area of more than 1,300 square miles. Now, this is evidence for a catastrophic event, not a long period of geological time. So this is why we see this topsy-turvy strata at Hart Mountain, where the top strata is actually dated older geologically than the rock layers at the bottom. That should not be. It's exactly the opposite of what we should see if evolution was true. So again, we're looking at the geological column. Erosion rates contradict the long time scales. Now, Robin was saying at the very beginning, she came down and I took her down to see the dinosaur tracks here in Glen Rose along the Paluxy River. But those dinosaur tracks would have been long gone if evolution's true. And that limestone on the river is dated to Cretaceous limestone at about 110 million years. Now, if 1/1000th of an inch erodes in 1,000 years, then in 60 million years of time, we're not even talking 110, just 60 million years of time, equates to 60 inches or about 5 feet of erosion on the surface. So in other words, all those dinosaur tracks would totally be eroded away. Now the whole layer would be gone. 5 feet just in 60 million years. I don't know what that would be in the 110 million, but you could probably put another couple of feet on that. So those dinosaur tracks should not be there. Matter of fact, those dinosaur tracks have recorded the end of the claws in most cases, and sometimes the pad and the heels of the foot. So very detailed markings on these dinosaur tracks. And Glen Rose is, of course, home to the Dinosaur Valley was the dinosaur capital of Texas. And then we see the slowest marine creatures in the lower strata, and then the slowest land animals higher up in the geological column. Now, 75% of the continents are covered with sedimentary rock, some about a mile thick. This limestone layer that is in Glen Rose here, it comes up to the surface. The whole Paluxy River is lined, that bottom of the river is lined with limestone rock. And but this ebbs and flows. You go across the county and that same layer will be 40 feet, maybe 100 feet under the surface. But this same layer goes all the way around the earth. But we see 75% of continents are covered with sedimentary rock layers. Now, there's evidence for rapid formation in the sedimentary deposits. Why? Because we see parallel layers, we see uniform thickness, we see absence of those vertical erosion cuts. Meteorites are only in the topmost layers, not down in the bottom. Absence of past vegetation or topsoil between the layers, polystrate fossils, rapid catastrophic burial. We see bent rock strata. We're going to look at Mount St. Helens recent conformation, and then the intercontinental sedimentary layers. Now, those limestone layers can run about 1,500 foot thick. And matter of fact, when we was in Israel, we saw part of that limestone layer in Israel one year. Now we're going to look at polystrate fossils. This is an example in the geology that we can observe and witness now. This is a polystrate fossil you're seeing through that's going through multiple layers of rock, which is interesting because trees don't normally go through multiple layers of rock. So these polystrate fossils require rapid deposition, and trees extending through multiple rock layers standing upright should not be there. So poly means many, strata means the geological layers. So this is a fossil going through many layers of rock. But we see many polystrate fossils have been buried crossing layers that typically claim to form over thousands or even millions of years. So this is actually true in many areas regarding trees. There's several areas for polystrate fossils. There's a site in Judkins in Nova Scotia. There's a site in Sydney, which is about 260 miles from Judkins there. There's another site in Lancashire in England, Germany's Ruhr region. There's one in Specimen Ridge here in the States in Yellowstone. There's one in France. There's one in Alabama at Blount County. There's a site in Australia, and then, of course, Eastern U.S. We're going to look at a couple of these. I actually been to Specimen Ridge in Yellowstone back in 2010. I told Ian I was going to be in Yellowstone. He goes, "You got to go to Specimen Ridge." I didn't even know about it at the time, so I hiked up Specimen Ridge to examine those trees up there. This is a polystrate tree in sandstone and coal. Now, you'll see that these tree trunks are crossing several strata of rock layers and were deposited at the same time. Let's get a better view of this here to see what you're looking at here. This is about a 30-foot petrified tree. It's found in the Kettles coal mine near Cookeville, Tennessee. The top and the bottom are all different coal seams dated to thousands of years, which is a different age. Now, this is the one in Knoxville. This is in the Cumberland Mountains. At the bottom, you'll see the coal seam there. It's kind of covered by vegetation right there. Here's a better view of the coal seam here, and then also at the top. This is one tree going through many rock layers of geological time. This is why it's called polystrate. Now, here's another view of the Cumberland Mountains at Knoxville. This is about 12 feet tall right here. And you can see it clearly going through that rock layer. Very similar to the one we see in Nova Scotia. This picture will have several identified in here, and I'll just show you where they are. There's 4 of them going right through the rock layers there. And you can see they're all parallel to each other going through the rock layer. Coal seam down at the bottom. So back to sedimentation rates. These are about 12 feet high. And according to Schuster's rate, he gives us about 32,000 years of time for this to happen. And then according to Officer and Page's rate, they give it 360,000 years of time for this event to happen. How about we just erase their estimates and we just go with a simpler yet better explanation. This is one catastrophic event that put these trees there. They didn't grow in place there through millions of years of time. It was a catastrophic event that got them in the same place there. This is an article from Bob Jones, Earth Science, page 306. It says in Germany and France, British Isles, Nova Scotia, California, several eastern states, fossils that extend through several layers of sedimentary rock have been found. These are called polystrate fossils. These are usually tree trunks in an upright or somewhat slanted position. We're going to go down. It says one type of polystrate fossil in California is especially interesting. Near Santa Barbara, fish fossils extend through several layers of algae fossils. Evolutionists calculate that each algae layer took hundreds or thousands of years to form. That would mean that the head and the tail of the same fish were buried several thousand years apart. Clearly, the beds must have been formed rapidly around the fish, not slowly. And this is exactly what we see, this polystrate tree trunk. And this is the one in Germany. And they give the height 7.6 meters. So again, this shows rapid deposition in the sedimentary layers, not over millions of years of time or thousands of years of time. Certainly, we see that's not true with fish or with trees. This is a textbook of geology by Charles Schuchert from London, page 784. This is a figure in there showing vertical trees and coal and sandstone in France. And you see how they're all parallel, embedded throughout these rock layers here. So this is nothing new. This has been well documented in geology. Now let's go to Specimen Ridge in Yellowstone. This is the petrified forest. You see the trees, how tall they are right here on the side of the mountain. The sign says across the valley rise the slopes of Specimen Ridge. But the forest you see there today is only the latest chapter in a remarkable story. Buried within the volcanic rocks that compose the mountain are 27 distinct layers of fossil forest that flourished 50 million years ago. Let's take a look at this. So here's the 27 layers of forest at Specimen Ridge that have broken off roots and extended through many layers. They did not grow there. All right, so let's look at this.
We're at Petrified Tree in Yellowstone National Park. Hi, my name is Bob Enyart with Real Science Radio. A couple decades ago, there was an exhibit here that said that this and other petrified trees had grown in situ in this location on various strata, and it happened dozens of times over. Well, 1980, when Mount St. Helens blew, then a geologist, Dr. Stephen Austin, doing research there on Spirit Lake, found that trees that were destroyed in a catastrophe were floating on the lake, and as they got waterlogged, they would sink vertically. They were upright floaters, and when they hit the bottom of the lake, as sediments continued to pour in and fill up the lake, other trees came down at different layers. And so he realized that that was the model that likely produced the trees here petrified in Yellowstone. Well, in 1995, my wife and I went to Maui and had dinner in the home of the National Park Ranger there at Haleakala. His name is Mark Tanaka Sanders. We discussed the fact that these trees at Yellowstone do not have root systems. The remnants of the petrified trees in dozens of different strata on this general hillside are missing roots. The roots are abruptly broken off 2 to 3 feet from the base of the trees. You can picture this tree did not grow here. It grew elsewhere. It was knocked over in a catastrophe. It was floating with many other trees. It became waterlogged, and because of the rocks that were bound up in the roots of the tree, and for other reasons, obviously, the tree began to sink, but it was an upright floater. And it came into the bottom of what was at that time the bottom of a lake. As the sediments continued to settle from that catastrophe, other upright floaters sunk in slightly different layers. Working with Mark Tanaka Sanders, we petitioned the National Park Service to get them to remove that exhibit that misrepresented the origin of these trees. If you notice at the exhibit, there's no mention of upright floaters. There's no mention of a lack of a root system below the petrified trees here, and that's probably for a reason. If you're interested in finding out more, please go online to rsr.org. That's for Real Science Radio.
This is going to be a video of Specimen Ridge here at the top. was a real beautiful place, a beautiful hike up that day. Took me several hours to get up there and back, but it was really a wonderful uh, uh, time to go do that. It's a little bit precarious at the top because there's a lot of loose rock, but if you're able to go, if you're ever in Yellowstone, try to get up to Specimen Ridge and take a look at that. There are grizzlies in that area because on the way down I ran into one. So make sure that you're cognizant. You always go with somebody, and you're wearing and you let know where let people know where you're at. But Specimen Ridge is beautiful. Let's move on now to Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens eruptions were important because it actually was a witnessed and observable event in a known period of time in history. We know the conditions before, during, and after the event. And so on a minor scale, we can geologically test the model for catastrophe. And Mount St. Helens actually was a great example of this. And it actually showed rapid deposition and erosion, which is very similar to the biblical flood. And we're going to look at another video here. I know if you got questions, we'll get to those at the very end, okay?
In March of 1980, after 123 years of silence, Mount St. Helens returned to life. Rising magma wedged the volcano apart, forming a massive bulge that swelled outward at a rate of 5 feet per day. On the morning of May 18th, the bulging north flank of the volcano collapsed, triggering a massive landslide. Pressure rising from deep within the volcano ripped open the mountainside, toppling entire forests and scorching everything in its path. A massive column of ash rose 15 miles high and drifted eastward, turning day to night in eastern Washington and depositing ash over a 22,000 square mile area. In the days that followed, as the ash settled, the extent of the destruction became clear. The top 1,300 feet of the summit was gone, and a mile-wide crater was the new face of Mount St. Helens. The landslide and blast completely transformed Spirit Lake and the landscape north of the volcano. The landslide buried 14 miles of the Toutle River Valley beneath 150 feet of mud and rock. Trees up to 17 miles away were blown down or scorched by the 300-mile-per-hour lateral blast. Since 1980, life has returned, and the 230-square-mile blast zone has undergone an equally astounding transformation. What started as a chaotic jumble of shattered trees, rock, and ash has developed into a highly productive ecosystem teeming with life. Today, Mount St. Helens supports one of the most diverse assemblages of plants and animals in the Pacific Northwest, and the area around the volcano has become an internationally renowned laboratory, classroom, and tourism destination.
Here's a picture of Mount St. Helens after it blew. And did you catch that valley, he said, was buried under 150 feet of mud and ash. We see evidence from Mount St. Helens and other areas. This has challenged the old belief that massive rock layers and river valleys took millions of years to form. Matter of fact, this is called the Little Grand Canyon on the Toutle River. On March 19th, 1982, this is after the major eruption in 1980, a smaller eruption melted the snow, causing a mud flow, which eroded the canyon system up to about 140 feet deep. This is done in several hours, called the Little Grand Canyon. Here's another photo of it here. Now, this is Engineers Canyon at Mount St. Helens. These canyons were not there prior to this event. And you can see this rapid erosion back in 1926 at the Burlingame Canyon was observed to have formed in less than 6 days. It measures 1,500 feet long, 120 feet deep, and 120 feet wide. So we see observable data today in the field that shows that we know the conditions before, during, and after. And again, this shows catastrophe, not millions of years of geological time. Now, it's interesting because this layer right here at Mount St. Helens was a pyroclastic flow that was deposited on June 12, 1980. And we see May 18th on the explosion was the layer under it. And then on March 19th, 1982 was the layer on top of it. Again, this is up to 400 feet thick. Because these are 3 different events here between May 18th, 1980, June 12th, 80, and March 19th, 1982. Again, this took hours of time. In this case, in one of these events, these rock layers took 3 hours to form, not millions of years of time. So again, this is all evidence that we see empirical data showing a young Earth. Now, this is part of the blast zone, showing the topple forest and the remains of the lake. It's called Spirit Lake. This is a lot of the logs that were blown into Spirit Lake. Here you see them waterlogged, and they're turned. A lot of them are turned upside down, and they're floating upside down. You can see where they've been sheared off. And then you'll see a couple of divers right there in the water. Scientists that's gone in and studied this. Something interesting, we see these prone floating logs, these upright floating logs, but they get buried and then sediment comes up around them, just like the polystrate trees that we showed earlier. Again, this is evidence of a rapid burial, not millions of years of time. These trees did not grow in this. They were deposited there. This million-year-old canyon was formed by Mount St. Helens in 1980. So you might see something like that if you ever go over to Mount St. Helens. All right, here's the caldera here. Something interesting because we're going to look at some dating here. So again, we know the conditions before, during, and after. And this is a photo from 1986. And they took 5 samples here in 1997 from the caldera. And it's interesting because the result was pretty amazing. And I'm going to show you what this is. So Mount St. Helens lava. Result was in millions of years, of course, between all 5 samples, up to one in particular, which is the most, is about 3 million years. Now we know that this is not millions of years old. We knew the conditions of it scientifically. So the lava dates, even though at 3 million years is a relatively low date in eons of time, it is not an accurate date at all. Actually, it's only 11 years old. So the dating is not accurate. We also see that if you take a cross section, that one of the basalts at the plateau at the top resulted in a date of 2,600 million years, and the Cardenas basalt at the bottom dated younger at 1,070 million years. Why the difference? Why would the lower strata be younger? It's not because this is over uniformitarian eons of time. This is not a uniformitarian process. And we see that back in 2004, some scientists with the RATE project came in and did some studies. Dr. John Baumgartner, Russell Humphrey, Stephen Austin, PhD in geology, Andrew Snelling, PhD in geology from University of Sydney. Most of you are familiar with these gentlemen from the RATE project. And here's what they got: dating the coal with carbon-14 from the coal sample bank. This is operated by U.S. Department of Energy, maintained at Pennsylvania State University. And here's what they came up with. Samples from the supposed Eocene, which is dated to 50 million years old, came out to an average of 26,000 years. Samples from the Cretaceous at 100 million came out to be on average date of 20,000. Samples from the Pennsylvanian, dated evolutionary time of 300 million, came out to be an average of 26,000. So we see that, again, those dating techniques are not in millions of years at all. They're erroneous dates and they're not accurate. Now, to kind of wrap up our part on the geology, there's also bent rock strata. I'm not going to show you a lot of these because you're familiar with a lot of these, but you can see this bent rock strata. It is not fractured, it is bent, and that can only be done under sedimentary processes underwater. And you can see how large this one is here. It's bent. It's interesting is you probably don't see that the Tapete sandstone is supposedly 500 million years old, and that the uplift is supposedly 440 million years later. Now, what you probably also don't notice is the people down at the bottom, and there's 4 of them. And so this is a very massive piece of rock, and that really puts it in scale when you look at it. Rock layers seldom show erosion between different strata. We talked about that. The Grand Canyon shows the same features, which carved it out. Now, this is a great example. This is one of the few times we'll actually look at Grand Canyon. Here's the Coconino Sandstone and the Hermit Shale. It's called the bathtub ring. At the top of the Grand Canyon is made up of the Coconino Sandstone. And right below is 2 layers where there is no erosion at all. If millions of years have passed between these 2 layers, where is the erosion? They have the same knife edge, flat, featureless boundaries between the layers. The same geological features are found around the world. They are flat. So there's no erosion between the rock layers. And that indicates that the sediments were laid down at the same time, not laid down over millions of years of time. So you can see how exactly that Coconino Sandstone sits right on top of that Hermit Shale. There is absolutely no millions of years of time that has passed in between those 2 deposits, those sedimentary deposits. Now let's move on to radio halos. This is, of course, in the rock, and continuing on with evidence we see in geology. Radio halos is pretty interesting. Physicist Robert Gentry has reported isolated radio halos of polonium-214 in the crystalline granite. The half-life of this polonium-214 in the granite is 0.000164 seconds. You can just say 164 microseconds. That had to be, that polonium-214 had to be functioning and recording in that granite rock in less than a second. That is not over millions of years of time. That is instantaneously. This is what he discovered in polonium-214. To record the existence of this element in such a very fast time frame, the granite must be in the crystalline state instantaneously, not over 300 million years. And exactly this is what we see in Dr. Gentry's work. Here's the reference for it if you're interested in it, Creation's Tiny Mystery by Robert Gentry. But something else, polonium-218 has a half-life of about 3 minutes. I think it's probably 3.5 minutes, technically. So we have problems with radiometric dating, as we saw in Mount St. Helens, rock formed in this particular known age in 1986, dated to a potassium argon date of 300 to 400,000 years. Mount Etna formed in 1964. Potassium argon rate showed 690 to 710,000 years ago. The basalt in Hawaii formed in 1800 to 1801. It came back with a potassium argon date of 6.3 to 39.3 million years ago. So we see that there's these are erroneous dates. Now we've looked at carbon-14, and now this is talking about potassium argon. What a lot of people don't know about potassium argon is that potassium can be leached out of rock with rainwater, I think, in about 4.5 hours, maybe 6 hours, but very quickly. And then argon's a very unstable gas. So there's a lot of problems with dating with potassium argon. A lot of people don't know that, but this is exactly what you see: formed, known ages, and then their erroneous dating by this method. So let's move on to fossils. This is a big problem for evolution, and especially for long ages of time. We're talking about the preponderance of a young Earth. Now we're going to look at the fossil record here. A lot of dinosaurs have been discovered in what we call the death pose, which means that they're articulated, their necks are broken and bent backward, showing asphyxia as they were being buried alive. This is exactly what we see in animals that are being asphyxiated. They're gasping for air while being covered over by sediments. And this is how we find them in the fossil record. This is another little fossil here, and his neck is arched backwards, struggling for air as he was embedded in his rock tomb there. We see another little dinosaur here, about a crow-sized raptor, and a sturgeon-like fish was buried alive. They're both gasping for air. We see this in their neck feature, arched backwards. This is the dinosaur death pose, and we see these dinosaurs all have the same phenomena. If we're lucky enough to get them articulated and we can find them like this, most of them will be in this position. Now, marine fossils are pretty unique. Here in Glen Rose, we're famous for the fossil clam fossils. There's billions of these clam fossils. They've been all buried alive because they're buried in a whole position. They're in a closed position, and they were not able to, those muscles, when they die, they would relax that muscle, the clam would pop open, and it would scatter. But the clams here have all been buried alive. This is another little shell here, a spiral shell index fossil. This is a little marine fossil found on top of Mount Everest, 29,000 feet. So we see that marine fossils are found on high mountains. I actually found index fossils on top of Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey when I was climbing there back in 2013 in search for the Ark. Here we see a perfect stingray, just like the modern day stingrays today. This rock is dated at 50 million years old, but it's the same stingray. A perfectly fossilized squid, dated at 160 million years. Here's a lobster at 200 million years. These are perfectly preserved. There's no evolution going on here. They're the same lobster from when they were buried to the same. Cockroach, 250 million years, same thing today. Shield bug, 50 million years, same thing today. Frog. Here's the oldest bat, 65 million years. This is the same. You've seen a lot of these. Turtles and snakes, same. There's no evidence for evolution here going on. This is observable evidence that we see in the rock. Crickets, scorpions, flies. These are, of course, trapped in amber, but again, there's no evolution occurring here. Fish eating other fish in life action. These were buried alive very quickly. It's a catastrophic event, not over millions of years of time. And this is exactly what we would expect to see if the biblical flood of Noah was true. This is evidence in the rocks. Let's look at the out of place fossils real quick. Out of place fossils that should not be around, but they are. Coelacanth is one great example, thought to have been extinct with the dinosaurs 70 million years ago until it was discovered in 1938 off the coast of Madagascar. Living. National Geographic sent divers there off the coast of South Africa, and they live very deep at about 1,000 feet down, and that's why they have been well hidden. The fishermen caught it in their nets, I think, twice. The first time it was dead, and I think they threw it away. The second time they got it in 38. But National Geographic sent divers down there. They videoed them. They feed vertically. These big stabilizer fins are so when they're feeding vertically, that keeps them in that position. And of course, evolution said this was evidence of these fins growing out to be legs, and they turned into terrestrial creatures and walked up on land. No, these are still alive today. They're unchanged from supposedly 70 million years ago from the time of the dinosaurs. That time is not there. It's assumed. There's no 70 million years. This is an out-of-place fossil tree called the Wollemi pine. It's thought to have gone extinct 150 million years ago until it was discovered again in 1994 in the Blue Mountains near Sydney, Australia. Very interesting. It's still alive and still around, unchanged. Here's a Laotian rock rat believed to be extinct for 11 million years until it was discovered in 1996 for sale as meat in the market of Laos. So again, unchanged, no evidence of evolution going on here. It's the same. 2005, they found a mammal found within the dinosaur in its stomach, which is pretty interesting because these two things are not supposed to be together. According to the evolutionary time frame, they're supposed to be separate and distinct. Yet we find a mammal in the dinosaur stomach, and it's not supposed to be there. So these are some of the living fossils that we see here. Other examples in the geological record that these living fossils that are still alive today are exactly like they are in the fossil record, unchanged over that time period. Now, soft tissue is really interesting because this is a well-preserved octopus, and it's about the most complete octopus fossilization they've ever discovered. This from January 2009 in Paleontology magazine from the Paleontological Association, which is amazing because this is supposedly dated at 95 million years old, yet one of these fossils is almost indistinguishable from living species, again, unchanged. Let's look at Willow, the dinosaur with the heart. Fossilized dinosaur heart. What are the odds of finding a fossilized dinosaur heart? The seemingly impossible has occurred within the 66 million year old skeleton. And this is from North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Here's a picture of Willow. There's the heart right there, preserved. Tendons, ribs, scapula, heart. It's all there. There's an X-ray of it. Amazing plesiosaur fossil preserves its skin and scales. 4.5 meters long, known as MH7, first excavated from a quarry near Holzminden, Germany. Almost a complete plesiosaur fossil, soft tissue intact, also preserving the skin and the scales. Unheard of. Leonardo, fully articulated and partialized mummified skeleton of a brachiosaur. This is supposedly dated at 77 million years ago. Again, this is not fossilized. It is partially mummified. This is the scale of how big it would be. This was discovered by amateurs in 2000 near Malta, Montana. Due to the mummification process, it underwent and retained original skin impressions with possibly some of the original tissue intact. Dubbed Leonardo, this hadrosaur is the most complete dinosaur fossil ever discovered, and even has a mummified stomach containing magnolia, fern, and conifer vegetation. Let's move on. This is a nodosaur dinosaur, again mummified, and veiled with its skin and guts intact. Even though the creature died supposedly 110 million years ago, its skin, bones, and other parts are almost as they were when the dinosaur was alive. This is a beautiful, beautiful example of a mummified dinosaur, completely intact. It was discovered in 2011, accidentally by a heavy machine operator, displayed at the Royal Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology in Alberta, Canada. The animal's original shape was retained, and the use of simulations was not necessary to recreate the model of what the animal looked like when it was alive. It's exactly how it died. It's mummified perfectly in preservation. And it's just a beautiful creature. It's actually been hailed as the Mona Lisa of dinosaurs. It's a beautiful, beautiful creature, yet a great example. But look, another one, fossil of an ancient shark that swam in the age of dinosaurs, solves century-long mystery. This is a perfectly preserved shark, unchanged from the millions of years ago, is claimed to be in. Examples of tissue preservation and fossils. But we have some troubled scientists here of preserved soft tissue because it's not supposed to be there millions of years. What about that? Why is it still soft? Well, it's interesting because we have current research now, and we're going to move on with another evidence of soft tissue research. From the marrow cavity of a T-Rex thigh bone, scientists have extracted soft tissue, and this flexible tissue could be stretched and returns to its original form. T-Rex soft tissue fossil yields preserved blood vessels, March 2005. This is research originally done by Dr. Mary Schweitzer of Montana University. Take a look at this.
What happened next happened by mistake. Mary put some fragments of the bone in acid to dissolve away the outermost layer of mineral. But the acid worked too fast, and all the mineral dissolved away. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. But there was, and it was elastic, like living tissue.
This is the piece.
No.
She showed us video she took under the microscope.
That's really what happened?
Yes.
That's the dinosaur bone?
Without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone. This was impossible. This bone was 68 million years old.
So you see this and you think, what? You
I didn't want to tell anybody.
You'd be ridiculed,
Yes.
right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again. I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack.
She said she dissolved the bone away and there were blood vessels. And, I was like shocked. I mean,
How could that be?
How could that be? That's right.
The things Mary was finding inside dinosaur bones,
Look at that.
blood vessels, and even what seemed to be intact cells, pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science. That organic material can't possibly survive even 1 million years, let alone 68 million. Mary, Jack, and their team published their B-Rex findings in a series of papers in the journal Science and were promptly attacked. Critics said their samples might have been contaminated, or that the supposed blood vessels were actually something called biofilm, a type of slime. But as Mary showed us, she's been able to replicate her findings. These are pieces of an even older dinosaur, a well-preserved 80 million year old duckbill. When she dissolved it away in acid,
Let's put this under the scope here.
well, look.
Is that a blood vessel?
This is a blood vessel.
You're
You
kidding.
see the branches right there? And look at all of them. And it's so consistent over and over and over again. We do this bone and it comes out and I get excited every time. I can't help it. I mean, 80 million years old.
Mary published her new results last year, and while some of her critics have been swayed, the controversy still rages, and the stakes are high. If blood vessels can survive 80 million years, what about DNA?
Yeah, another closer look at these red blood cells here. This is a slide from 93. It's from a T-Rex. Impossible. Round and tiny, nucleated. They were threaded through the bone like red blood cells and blood vessels, but the blood cells in the dinosaur bone should have disappeared eons ago. This is from Science Research News from 1993. I got goosebumps. It was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. How could blood cells survive that long? Dr. Mary Schweitzer, definition of fossilization needs a bit of refining since our current theories do not account for soft tissue and cellular preservation. It's all pretty interesting. Discover magazine, April 2006. I had one reviewer tell me that he didn't care what the data said. He knew that what I was finding wasn't possible, said Mary Schweitzer. So even some people are not going to believe the evidence. It's empirical evidence. It's science. It's what Dr. Mary Schweitzer did. She did what any good scientist would do. She would take the sample. She repeated it. She observed it, and she tried to falsify it. And she could not falsify the data. So again, impossible. Well, what data would convince you? This is, I think, something that most of the way the scientists feel. He said none, no data would convince me. Why? Because his mind's already made up. Our current theories do not account for soft tissue. So, yeah, this is pretty interesting. We're doing current research at the Creation Evidence Museum on soft tissue, and we're finding collagen, we're finding red blood cells, we're finding nerve endings. A lot of this is not published yet, but some of it has been published by Mark Armitage, and Mark helped us set up our microscopy lab at the Creation Evidence Museum. If you come to Glen Rose, you'll be able to see those microscopes in the lab. You may not be able to go in the lab. It's very sensitive equipment, but Mark has done some really great research and publishing on that. But now the Creation Evidence Museum has taken up the cutting edge research on dinosaur soft tissue. So the real fossil record, 95% of all fossils are marine invertebrates. 95% of the remaining 5% of that are plants. 95% of the rest of that are fish. Most of the rest are insects, which means that less than 1% of fossils are actually vertebrate fossils, which includes the dinosaurs. So a lot of people don't know that little statistics. This includes all amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. Pretty interesting because dinosaurs in the fossil record represent about less than 1% of the fossil record. So the biblical flood model predictions, sedimentary layers all over the world, no erosion marks between sediment layers, bent rock layers, polystrate or polystrate of fossils, petrified trees buried standing upright, trillions of fossils in the sediment layers, and then large coal deposits. This is all exactly what we see now in the geological record. You got to believe in transitional forms rather than terminal forms. If this is true, then the fossil record should be mostly transitional forms. The absence of this evidence is an embarrassment to evolutionists. So the point is that fossils are records of dead animals. They can never prove evolution because it is a record of stasis. So you get the Cambrian level explosion, and then you get a record of stasis, which is a record of dead animals in the fossil record, and it is a hostile witness against evolution. The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record is a trade secret of paleontologists, said Professor Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard University, Department of Paleontology. Evolution requires transitional forms, and paleontology does not provide them, Dr. David Kitts of OU. Now let's look at another evidence. This is getting into the cosmological evidence. We're going to touch on this briefly. It's the decay of the Earth's magnetic field. This is one of the single strongest arguments for a young Earth. We're talking about the preponderance of evidence for a young Earth. The late Dr. Thomas Barnes, emeritus professor of physics at the University of Texas, El Paso, has published a definitive work in the field. Scientific observations since 1829 have showed that the Earth's magnetic field has been measurably decaying at an exponential rate, demonstrating its half-life to be approximately 1,400 years. Earth's magnetic field is pretty important and allows us to see the beautiful aurora borealis and the aurora australis as it protects us from the solar radiation. But our magnetic field is winding down. It is not as strong as now as what it was in the past. And actually, estimates show that in just 20,000 years from now, the magnetic field will completely disappear. In practical application, its strength 20,000 years ago would approximate that magnetic field would have been the strength of a magnetic star. Underneath those conditions, many of the atoms necessary for life to have formed on the Earth could not be possible. The data demonstrates that the Earth's entire history is young, within a few thousand years. So if you go 20,000 years to the past, it's two-star. It has the strength of a magnetic star. In Earth, life isn't possible. 20,000 years from now, it's going to play out, and life isn't going to be possible. So this is a very strong evidence for the young Earth. But other planets have magnetic fields too. Dr. Russell Humphreys, renowned physicist and Bible believer, developed a theory to try to explain the strength of the magnetic field as well as that of neighboring planets. But instead of assuming millions of years, he took the 6,000 year position described in the Bible, and he made a testable prediction. Before we knew the strengths of magnetic fields of Uranus, Neptune, Dr. Russell Humphreys modeled and predicted how strong their magnetic fields would be based on an estimated 6,000 years of decay. When Voyager 2 traveled past these distant worlds and measured their magnetic fields, guess what? The evolutionary predictions based on the Big Bang timeframe were vastly off. However, it turned out that Dr. Humphreys' research was nearly spot on. Scientific validation of his prediction that he had based on biblical data, he had accurately predicted the magnetic fields of these planets before the space probes reached planets. Magnetic fields don't last billions of years old. So his prediction was scientifically validated with his research. So they can't be millions of years old or billions of years old. In the case of the galaxy, should be in the billions. Magnetic fields don't last that long. Let's move on to helium content in the Earth's atmosphere, and we're about to wrap up here. Helium content in the Earth's atmosphere. Physicist Melvin Cook, Nobel Prize medalist, found that helium-4 enters our atmosphere from solar wind and radioactive decay of uranium. At present rates, our atmosphere would accumulate current helium-4 amounts in less than 10,000 years. And this was from Melvin Cook. Where is the Earth's radiogenic helium? This is from Nature, volume 179, if you want to see the source. So the evidence for a young Earth: geological column, radio halos, fossil record, uranium accumulation, carbon-14 in the atmosphere, and dinosaur bones, and diamonds. Carbon-14 is present, shouldn't be there. Helium in the atmosphere, dinosaur soft tissue, shouldn't be there. Decaying magnetic field, and that should say field, not FI. Decaying magnetic fields, population dynamics. All evidence for a young Earth. And we have a questionable geological phenomenon, radiometric dating, that's erroneous. The evidence doesn't line up. The evidence for a young Earth is there. The Bible in the time of creation is based on the plain reading of the text. The words, the Hebrew word yom, which is the Hebrew word that indicates the word for a 24-hour day, yom. Day with a number, day number 1, day 2, 3, etc. Evening and the morning were the first day. Genesis 1:14. The Sabbath in Exodus 20:11 and in Exodus 31:17. The sentence structure, the statement made by Jesus in Mark 10:6. The genealogies of Genesis 5, 1 Chronicles 1, Luke 3. The plants and the sunlight, the sun. It all requires a symbiotic relationship that has to be functioning at the same time for life to happen. Not over millions of years of time. You can't have, the plants and the trees coming along and then a million years later, the sun. It doesn't work for biosynthesis or photosynthesis. You got to have it all happening at the same time. It requires those symbiotic relationships. So in the closing statements here, long ages of time is not a fact. Most evidence contradicts eons of time. The Bible does not teach the gap theory or any of the millions of years. You have to insert it theologically. The Bible teaches a young earth, which agrees with science, and you can run those numbers through the genealogy alone will show you a young earth, at least in the genealogy part of the Bible. And many scientists, including astronomers, disagree with evolution's long ages of time. If you want to follow my work, it's at aaronjudkins.com. You can find the new book, Decoding Göbekli Tepe, and a lot of other things that I've done there. And my new Substack account, which I'm releasing. Matter of fact, today I just released an article pertaining to this lecture tonight. It's at Dr. Aaron Judkins on Substack, Dr. Aaron Judkins, and you can go on there. I've got a lot more information referenced from this lecture and in notes that you can go through. It's all referenced and footnoted that you can go on there and take a look at it and have that as a resource to you. And then on patreon.com, if we have a new Patreon site, it's under Ancient Pathways. And we have a lot of free content there for you. And it's also linked up at aaronjudkins.com. All right. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen here.
Well, thank you. That was really good.
We're going to...
Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I just I didn't want a gap in the conversation.
Well, I saw a lot of questions in the chat, so I thought maybe I would take some questions and I'll just read off some of these questions in the chat room here.
Oh yeah, well, I was going to ask my questions first, and then Terry was going to ask the ones in the chat.
Yeah, okay, yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so the willow dinosaur.
Yeah.
That was found intact. Is that the one with the heart, right?
Yes, that's the one with the heart. Yeah, that was found intact. It was mummified.
I have never heard of that.
Yeah. Well, and this is why we do things like this. You know, somebody may have picked up on it somewhere and others don't know about it. This is why stuff like this is important, so we can share information and we can use it as, as we're in daily conversations, just, with people. Well, what evidence do you have? Well, let's look at Willow the dinosaur. It had a mummified dinosaur heart. Really? How did it get there? How did that happen? It all can lead up to a great conversation. When I was down in the Paluxy a couple of summers ago, I was just, had my family down there. I was showing, it was, we was under a drought, perfect for dinosaur tracks. And so we went down there. And some of these dinosaur tracks, man, were pristine at the bottom of the riverbed. This was down at State Park, and just a wonderful time to be down there. And a geologist, he came up and asked me a question. I didn't know he was a geologist, but it just allowed me to talk to him and gave him some answers. He scratched his head. He was walking with his dog. He turned and he left. And about 20 minutes later, he came back and asked me some more questions. Then he told me, he said, "I'm a geologist." And he goes, "I've never heard of any of this stuff." And I said, well, this is stuff for you to consider. It's not an argument if I'm right and everybody else is wrong. That's not the way I approach it. I reserve the right to be wrong, and I have been. I'm saying we can use these as evidence to start the conversation with people and let them make up their own mind. That's kind of how I do it. Unless you're in a forum that, you're lecturing or something, but I just like to present evidence and let people make up their own mind about it. But look, just going back to that one scientist about Dr. Mary Swatcher, I don't care what evidence you have, I'm not going to believe it. So you're going to have some like that. Just dust off the soles of your feet and move on to the next one.
Yeah, that was the next one that I was going to ask. And I do run into many people who have made up their minds. And, it took me 50 years, but I realized that I can't argue with those people. You're never going to win. You just got to pray for them and plant a seed.
Yep.
So what is the half-life for tissue? I mean, and I can never really get a good answer. And and you're an archaeologist, not a biologist or whatever, or paleontologist. But what do you know at all what, you know, w- when the tissue inside a body, I get grossed out talking and thinking about it. When it would when it would cease to exist, how long?
Okay, here's the answer I have for you. The half-life for DNA is 521 years. The half-life
Oh,
for DNA. So if you want to use that, that's there it is. It's not very long, 521 years. So after 521 years, half the DNA is gone. Another 521 years, half of that's gone. And that's referenced and cited in the paper that I put up today on Substack. So
I'm going to
um,
take a look at that.
yeah, so a lot of now I don't have all the evidences that we talked about today here. Um, I do have a lot of them on there, but the ones on there are footnoted and referenced. You can go back and find those. Like Leonardo, we talked about, and Willow, the dinosaur. That's not going to be in there, but what I
That's
do
okay.
have in there are footnoted, and that DNA reference is footnoted there, so you can go back and look at the source. What's the
I'll
next
take a look.
question?
And then one other question that I had, which I think I just forgot. So I'm going to go ahead and let Terry ask the questions.
Sure, go ahead.
We actually just have one, and then we'll wrap up our time on the live feed. But Jim is asking about a picture that you showed of some red blood cell
Mm-hmm.
from 1993, and he
Mm-hmm.
wants to know why wasn't there a bigger deal made of it?
There was. There was a big deal made out of it. It totally
Yeah,
rocked the paleo.
I'm a little bit confused because I know that we know about all of that those findings and we've had speakers, but he said that there was one picture in particular that he caught on to that he felt was not publicized well enough.
It was all
He's
published by
hoping that
Dr.
you
Mary
remember.
Schweitzer, and it rocked the paleontology community. It's all been published, going back to the 90s. So, and like the 60 Minutes segment I showed you, it made national news, international news. This is not new information. Now, the science and the research behind it is ongoing and continuing, and we're continuing to spearhead that research in dinosaur soft tissue here in Glen Rose at the Creation Evidence Museum in our microscopy lab. But look, those it's published. It's all referenced. It's just a matter of you going to find it. I do have some of those referenced in the Substack article, um, but
I think he
it's
means why wasn't it like put out to the general public
well,
in,
it was put out to the general public. I mean, 60 Minutes is general public.
oh, I know,
So,
but I never heard of it until 2012.
Well, and you
well,
just made a comment. It's up to us to go find it. Like maybe that's what he's getting at too with his
Oh,
question
okay.
is
Yeah, up to
why
us to
isn't
find
it
it. Yeah.
more loudly proclaimed? Like why aren't we seeing news headlines often or louder? Like
well,
we have
because
to go look
with
for
the
that
impact
information.
of the when the impact of the conclusions came out, then the tide turned against Dr. Mary Schweitzer. So at first it was, hey, this is great. Wow, we can't believe it. It shouldn't be there. I'll be darned, 80 million years. And then they realized the implications. And when the implications started to impact their theory, they put a lot of pressure on Dr. Schweitzer to recant her research. So much so that they were forcing her out of her profession. This has happened not just with her, but many others, geologists and archaeologists who have been forced to recant or recall their information or be forced out of their field altogether and been blackballed. They were doing this with Dr. Mary Schweitzer, and so the tide turned very quickly against her, and they told her to stop. And so there was years of where there was a hiatus in the research because nothing was being done up until the time frame where enter Mark Armitage, who got fired from the University of California for publishing on this exact research on a different bone, a different time frame, but he published on it, and the university fired him over it.
Yes,
and
we have his
he
Triceratops
yeah,
horn.
in the Substack article, I've got links for his published articles. But look, he sued and won his lawsuit. He was unlawfully, unjustifiably fired from his position for showing science that contradicted the theory of evolution. This is what happened to Mary Schweitzer, and so the public tide turned, and then there was a period of there was nothing happening until creationists took up the mantle, and matter of fact, we offered, I say we, it wasn't me, but creationists offered Dr. Jack Horner $10,000 if he would do a double blind study from his dinosaurs. We would take our dinosaur bones that we excavated from, I think it was in the Badlands of Montana, and taken through a double blind study to see if we could recreate this experiment that Mary Schweitzer did with finding red blood cells, soft tissue, elastic tissue, etc. And he refused it. He refused. It's like $10,000 to carry on your research. Let's just do a double blind study and let's the evidence, let's just see where the evidence goes. He didn't want to do it. So the creationists have been doing it, but it's taken a process because of folks like Mark Armitage, who actually donated had the microscopes donated to our lab, some electron microscopes. It's very sensitive and expensive equipment. It's a steep learning curve to learn how to use that. We've had to train our staff. It's under controlled environments, and it just takes money. We have the bones. We have 20 tons of dinosaur bones that we've excavated from Colorado that we can use, and we're doing research now. Matter of fact, hopefully by the end of this week or soon, I'm going to release either on Patreon site or on Substack a video. I took Trey Smith. Many of you know Trey Smith. I took Trey Smith through a personal tour of the lab, and I showed him some of the research that we're finding on this, and it's amazing. It's amazing. It's not published yet, but Mark's research is, and it's ongoing, and you can find that. So.
Well, that was great. Thank you. And
All right.
go ahead.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and wrap up our time here. So thank you for that. So once again, our guest tonight is Dr. Aaron Judkins. He's the Maverick Archaeologist, and you can find more information about him at aaronjudkins.com. And you can also visit our website, which is tinyurl.com/CF Santee. That's C for creation and F for fellowship. The word Santee is SANTEE. While you're there, you can visit our archives and you can actually learn more about the topic that we were just discussing. We've had two speakers come on with us in the past, Matt Miles and Dr. Jay Weil, who have both spoken about dinosaur soft tissue findings. We've also had attorney Brad Dacus, who was the attorney for Mark Armitage. So you can peruse through our archives and learn even more about these important things. So with that, we're going to go ahead and sign off for tonight.